Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, let me tell you about Midnight Myths. Midnight Myths is a game I actually worked on. I did the coding for this, along with my friend General Drowned, for a game jam, the first one we ever did, as well as this is the first game that we ever did. If you guys would like to check it out, it's for free on itch.io. I'll put a link in the description down below. Just wanted to let you guys know about it and see if I can get some opinions on the first game. If you guys like this, what you want to see more of, or if you want me to do more games in the future. And now, on to tonight's story. Ralph walked a lot, like every day, a lot. He had lost his car a few years ago during the pandemic, not because he couldn't pay for it, but because he had a habit of driving drunk, and the cops took his license after the third time. So it didn't make a lot of sense to have it. He had walked ever since, and it kind of helped with his sobriety. He was a bit of a mess before that, drinking a lot, showing up to work hungover, eating too much fast food. But the walking had helped him drop a lot of weight, and had kind of made him not want to drink. Walking while you were drunk was kind of miserable, and when walking was your means of transportation, you get pretty good at avoiding things that left you unable to do it. Ralph was coming into town on Tuesday, walking up the sidewalk that led from the trailer park that he lived in to the grocery store when he saw the first sign. It was a normal enough white sign with big block letters at the top that read, "Missing." The thing that stopped him was the face that looked out from the sign. It was a guy of about 300 pounds, thinning hair pulled back into a ponytail and deep bags under his eyes. He was a deeply unhappy man, a man who looked like he was just looking for a hole to die in, and if it had a beer in it, then all the better. The eyes that stared out of that poster looked like the eyes that stared from between the bars of a drunk tank, and they had more than once. Ralph reached out and took the sign, staring into the eyes that he hadn't seen in years. He was looking at himself. Just a past version of himself. A version 2 or 3 years out of date. Out of date was a good way to describe it. Like spoiled milk. Missing, Ralph Gilbert. Address 9733 Earring Way, Trailer 17. Last seen April 23rd, 2023, walking along the shoulder of the road. Call Filibuster Sheriff's Office with any information. Cash reward possible. Cash reward, Ralph thought. It was weird to think that someone would be willing to offer a cash reward for someone like him, but he supposed it was possible. The friends he had now certainly valued him more than his bitch of an ex-wife or either of his ungrateful children had. More than the family he had left too, for that matter. He put the flyer back up, thinking it was weird that they hadn't just come out to the house to see if he was there. He had been there for a week after the what, he thought. The night that something happened. Something Ralph couldn't really remember. He kept walking up the street, enjoying the later afternoon as it dwindled towards dusk. This was his favorite time to walk, he thought. The weather was hot, even for early May, and he spent most days inside due to the heat and the way the sun had made his eyes hurt lately. The evening walks were about the best thing for him, and he couldn't wait till autumn came, and he could stand to walk during the day again. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his progress. 2021 had been a pretty turbulent year for Ralph, but not all of it had been bad. He had started noticing the walking was making him lose weight, and that he felt better about being more active. It would have been very easy to sit on his couch and feel bad about it. He had certainly done that for a while, but as his food ran out and the money he had gotten from the disability payments had started to dwindle, he knew he was going to need to do something. That was how the walking had started. Walk to the grocery store, walk to McDonald's, walk to the 24/7 Phil that he worked nights at, and walk home. After a while, people in the trailer park started noticing that he was walking, and they would offer to pay him if he would walk their dogs. Pretty soon, Ralph had a bunch of mutts on leashes, and he became known as the Dog Man. Soon, people came to walk their dogs with him, and Ralph felt like he finally had friends. He hadn't had friends since high school. and the ones he had then had never led him into anything healthy. These guys were walking with him, helping him find shoes that wouldn't pinch his feet and give him blisters, suggesting pants that wouldn't give him a heat rash. And one day, Ralph hopped on the scale and discovered that he had lost 50 pounds. By 2022, it was 100, and by the next year, he was at 180 and feeling better than he ever had. His trips to McDonald's were down to once a week. His dog walking was making enough money to keep his bills paid and his fridge filled, and Ralph felt better than he had in years. He had felt like that right up until last week when something had happened. As Ralph came into town, he saw more of the signs hanging on the poles and was a little curious as to why no one had come to the trailer to check on him if they were so worried. He had been there all week. They could have come and knocked. Ralph had been kind of out of it the last week, though, and he was worried that he might have caught something. He barely remembered stumbling home after whatever had happened. Ralph hadn't liked that. It reminded him of being drunk and out of control again. How many times had he stumbled into the trailer after a night of drinking to find that he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there? He sat on his couch, just looking at the dark television, and suddenly, he wondered where the groceries had gone. That was when he remembered that he'd been carrying groceries. He'd been coming back from the Forest Hill grocer, bags bulging in his hands, and he had come around the corner, Matheson Curve. Then, he didn't know. Something had made him squint, and he thought, oh shit, there goes my milk. And then he'd been walking back into his trailer. As he walked into town now, he saw more missing posters, and it started to give him the creeps. Watching his own face, his false face, looking back at him was eerie, and he wanted to rip them down. He was here, he was alive. Why were they looking for him? He wasn't missing. He was walking up the road. He passed people, side-eyeing them as if expecting to be recognized. But they just walked right past him without a look back. That was weird, Ralph thought. Yeah, he'd been gone for a week, but people surely hadn't forgotten him that quickly. He'd been sitting in his trailer for a week before he thought that a walk had seemed like a good idea. It was weird. The food should have run out by now, but Ralph really hadn't been hungry. He'd moved between the living room and bedroom like a sleepwalker, sleeping like he hadn't done since he was 300 pounds of lazy couch potato. He hadn't felt like he needed to eat anything either, though, and that was rare. Despite his weight loss, he still had to manage his prodigious appetite. He couldn't even remember drinking water that whole week. And until he'd gotten up to walk, he'd worried that he was catching the flu. He had wandered around in a daze, just kind of existing, and it made him feel good when the afternoon had finally called to him. As he walked towards the supermarket, however, he suddenly wished he had stayed at home. Sitting in the parking lot of Forest Hill Grocer was a green Ford Focus that became the focus of his terror. It shouldn't have been that way. It was just a car, but there was something about it that made him stop and stare. His legs felt made of lead, and his bowels would have turned to water, except he remembered that he hadn't done that all week either. But that made sense, he supposed. Nothing going in meant nothing coming out. Right? It didn't matter. After a week of no food or water, Ralph should be dead, and that thought seemed to move him at long last. He was suddenly walking towards the car, his eyes falling on a dent in the front bumper. That was a fresh dent, though Ralph didn't know how he knew that. The door to the car was open, and Ralph climbed into the back seat like a sleepwalker. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, feeling kind of silly. This was stupid. The owner of the Focus would come back and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. He'd call the cops. Ralph would go to jail, and then he'd be in big trouble. Well, Ralph thought, at least then they would know where he was. Ralph supposed they could take the signs down if he was sitting in jail. Finally, after an indeterminate amount of time, the owner came out with groceries in brown paper bags. He was a young kid, maybe 20, 22, and when he opened the back door, he set them inside without comment. Ralph watched him move around in the front seat and climb in, cranking the car and driving off. The further they went, the more sure Ralph was that the kid would see him. The kid would look in the rearview mirror, see Ralph sitting there and freak out. He might have a wreck, and Ralph would feel terrible about that. The longer they rode without the kid commenting on his presence, the stranger it all felt. Ralph leaned towards the kid a little, meaning to tap him, but as he did, he caught a look at the rearview mirror and stopped. The back seat in the mirror was empty, except for the groceries. That's when he remembered. And suddenly, Ralph wasn't in the kid's focus anymore. Suddenly, he was back on the side of the road near the guardrail of Matheson Curve, and he could see the headlights in his eyes again. The kid had been going too fast, hot-rodding around, and his tires had screeched as he hit Ralph. Ralph's groceries had gone everywhere, his milk squishing onto the tire as his lettuce rolled onto the guardrail. The kid had come out to find Ralph lying across the guardrail, moaning and groaning as he lay dying. The hit had thrown him back, bringing him to rest against the metal rail that had broken his back. He looked at the kid, begging him to help him. In his panic, the kid had done the only thing he could think to do. He pushed Ralph over the side of the rail and into the drop below. It was night now, and Ralph was looking over that rail again. He couldn't see his body down below. It had fallen into the bottom and likely been picked clean by scavengers. But he knew it was down there. Ralph would likely go on to be a town legend, someone who had just disappeared one day after making a slight splash and filibuster. But for now, all he could do was look down into the ravine and wonder what to do next. He had read some ghost stories when he was younger, wrote a few when he got older, but it wasn't every day that you become one. Something wafted past him on a stray wind, and when Ralph caught it, he realized it was one of the missing posters. An idea occurred to him. And he thought maybe he wouldn't have to stay a mystery. Officer Vermis stood by the guardrail ready to catch the kid if he decided to take a nosedive. It was pretty high. He might opt for a short flight over a lengthy prison sentence, but Vermis doubted it. The wind pushed his hair just as it did the officer's jacket, and he pointed down almost accusingly as he turned to the kid. "And that's where you pushed the body over?" Vermis asked. The kid, Tyler Mishad, nodded before being taken back to the station in the back of a different squad car. Vermis sighed. That was going to be some hard canvassing, but they'd find Ralph Gilbert. When they had gone to the kid's house, he had as good as confessed on the spot, and that had made it all very easy. He was repentant, very sorry, and very young, and some soft-hearted judge would probably not insist on the death penalty for him. It was unlikely he would never operate a motor vehicle again, not unless the state prison let him run a tractor or something. He supposed that would have to be good enough. It was weird, though. The police would have probably never known about the accident if it hadn't been for the tip they'd gotten. Looking at Ralph's picture on the front of the poster, Vermis remembered the night they'd taken his license. He'd been a bad drunk, but he'd turned it around, and Vermis hated that he had to end up like this. It was a bigger shame that the kid had to ruin his life by a moment of inattention, and those were the breaks. He flipped it over, looking at the odd writing on the back. It looked like it had been done with mucus, except it was a fluorescent green, like the slime they used to dump on the kids in the show his boy had watched when they were younger. He didn't know what had written it, and he didn't care. They could take Ralph Gilbert out of the unsolved case file, put him in the closed case pile. That was good enough for him. The message read, "Green Ford Focus. Dent in the front bumper. Kid hit Ralph Gilbert about a week ago on Matheson Curve. Body in the ravine. Don't let him rot down there." Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I know I haven't had as many updates as I would like to have on the channel lately, and things just kind of get really hard with shit that's happening in my family. But hey, I wanted to say thank you so much for being around, thank you so much for still supporting me and for coming back to listen to new stories. If you guys want to get updates anytime that I do upload, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Or if you're listening over a podcast, I think it's still a subscribe button or a follow button or whatever happen. Those happen to be. As always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody out there on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. A very, very big thank you to everybody there, and to especially Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, King Crab, Calcifer420, Veronica Lynn Lopez, Marlon Chavez, Azazel66603, Ethan Leon, Polaris Prospect X, Blake Rattler, Viceroy Scorn, Samara Lynn, Disciple, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jenna's Pet, Clonable, J Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Remember the Sun, Estebean, Hour Minute Second Time, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Voice of Sand, Phycomel, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Tommy Walters, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Tristan Pelton, Ball Arms the Rat, The Ginger Bros, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. To all of you guys there, everybody who's down in the description, and everybody who can just give $1, I want to say thank you to you guys. And if you would like to join this list in the description, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepy. And if you would like to join this list in the description, sweet dreams.